Welcome to our Urban Legends podcast. I'm Dr. Gloria McDaniel Hall. I've been a teacher, a principal, and assistant superintendent, all within urban schools in Chicago and around the country. Our Urban Legends podcast is a forum for sharing ideas, strategizing together, and supporting each other as we dismantle the deficit narratives sometimes associated with urban education and discuss where and how amazing work is being done.
So I am so excited today. I think this is episode 46 or 47 of my Urban Legends podcast. And today I am honored to have a former colleague, but still no, I'm not going to ever call you former. He's a colleague of mine who I had the privilege of working with at National Louis University. And the thing about Dr. Rashid, when I first saw him at National Louis, he would always be on Zoom, and sometimes we would be in the room, but everything he said would always be so brilliant. And I'll be like, I need to make sure that I get a chance to meet this man. He just has such a wealth of knowledge. And then George Floyd was murdered, and we ended up having to develop this racial justice task force. And when we did, Kamau was our chair. He was one of the co-chairs, and I joined that task force. And ever since then, he hasn't been able to get rid of me. So I'm excited today because he left National Louis, even though he still does work with us at times. But he left so that he could establish a new program, a new doctoral program, which is what we're going to be talking about today. So you know that before I even get into the questions, I want to ask you, Dr. Rashid, to give us your journey in education, the things that are your interests. And I know you have interest in a certain martial arts. I know you have interest in Black scholars. And so we could just spend the whole 30 minutes on this one question, but your journey in education and your interests, tell us about those.
Thank you. Yeah. So I'm born and raised in Chicago, and so Chicago has been a major part of my own development. So went to CPS for most of K through 12. Had a brief detour back in '89. For whatever reason, my parents moved to Indiana. I don't know why. But it was 6 months, and then we were back in the city. Went to Limblom Technical High School in the south side of Chicago. I think this Limblom Math and Science Academy now. And that whole environment was really, really key because when I was a teenager, this is in the early 90s, late 80s, early 90s, a lot of what was happening both in the city and also in the world was a part of what shaped me. It was during that time that I read the autobiography of Malcolm X and also The Art of War by Sun Tzu. And both of those books had an indelible impact on my development. I went to the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, and that was, and again, another place that really catalyzed a lot of my thinking and really enabled me to really extend a lot of these questions that had always existed that were partly answered by reading Malcolm's autobiography, but questions which I was able to continue to pursue as an undergrad. Came back to Chicago at the end of the 90s, and ended up really almost through happenstance at the Carruthers Center, what is today the Carruthers Center for Inner City Studies at Northeastern Illinois University, in a classroom with two men, Dr. Anderson Thompson and Dr. Jacob H. Carruthers. And if my book, if my life was a book, each of them deserve at least a chapter, maybe two chapters. Right. They were profoundly important, profoundly significant to my development, along with a number of other elders who I was really blessed to have encountered during that time. People like Baba Hannibal Afrique, for example, who also had just an enormous impact on my development. Graduated from NEIU, went back to the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign to get a PhD in educational policy studies, really exploring a lot of these ideas, especially the ideas from my experience at the Carruthers Center, looking at African thought, looking at Black thought, looking at these critical ideas and the implications of these ideas for how we can improve the conditions that we find ourselves in existing in society. And came back to Chicago. First job after graduation was at National Louis University. Wow. Social foundations of education. And it was really interesting because one of the things that I tried to do in my classes, particularly what would you call it, social justice perspectives on history and philosophy of U.S. education was the class. Yeah, I'm forgetting the course, the number. I'm from American designation, but anyway, 511, but I can't remember what one before the 511, FND 511 or something. But anyway, FDN 511, I think. But anyway, that class, and especially some of the students that I taught over the summer, because those classes were the most impactful, really dealing with Chicago. So I retooled the class. We were teaching students in this urban teacher residency. So I retooled the class and made the class like 90% about Chicago. So still history and philosophy of U.S. education with a very specific focus on Chicago. And I think it was that experience coupled with what I had gotten a couple of decades ago at the Carruthers Center that really helped me to think about this idea of Chicago as a laboratory. You know what I mean? And it was around that time we also had our students doing these community walks. That was a part of their summer experience. And so at any rate, I ended up getting this position. And it really became an opportunity to synthesize a lot of these ideas, a lot of the way in which I was thinking about education as an educator of educators at NOU, but also some of the things that came out of my own formative experiences in terms of what does it mean. We think about critical literacy, this idea of what does it mean to read the world, right? And how do we understand the world and our place in it? So that's been my journey. And again, like I say, Chicago has really been very central to my own developmental experience, or developmental arc, I should say.
It is amazing. The thing that's amazing to me, and the message that I want people to understand also, is that we sit in rooms with people who have so varied experiences. But usually, especially at the university level, we don't get the opportunity to collaborate across departments. Or I just remember hearing you talk and going, I have to be in that space so that I can learn more about. I've lived most of my life in Chicago too, but didn't know the majority of things that we learned as we sat in the rooms together. But anyway, so yeah. I have been on your advisory committee for the new program that you developed. I don't know if you know how cool it is that you developed the doctoral program at Northeastern, and it's called Leadership, Equity, and Inquiry, the EDD program, which stands for Leadership.
Yep, LEI, Leadership, Equity, and Inquiry, the LEI program.
Yes. So LEI, tell us about that program and this idea of being a scholar practitioner. Mm-hmm. We did just have a cool seminar with different people who you had, including me, presenting about what it meant for their lives to be a scholar practitioner. Yeah. But how's your doctoral program different than the typical one?
Yeah, so that's a great question, because it was interesting because when this is like late 2020. I'm at NOU. Yeah, everything's online because of COVID, and a colleague of mine sent me this job listing for a job that was to develop an urban education EDD program at NEIU. And I saw it, I was like, I ain't gonna apply for that. It's urban education is a thing, and it's people, they specialize in that thing called urban education. I was like, I'm not gonna apply for that. But then I sat back and thought about it, and I was like, well, one could argue that there are things that I do that have implications for urban education, and they might be open to some of the ideas that I have that may sort of expand the way in which we think about that. And so sometime in early December, I think 2020, I decided to apply for it. And it seems like some of the ideas I had were ideas to which they were receptive, right? But
just a little bit.
Right. And so for me, at the heart of the idea was this question of how do we think about leadership, right? How do we think about leadership? One of the things that I think we is a reality that we have to face, and this is something that comes out of my scholarship, right? My dissertation was about W.B. Du Bois, and I'm writing one or two books about Du Bois, and that's a whole other discussion. But one of the things that Du Bois, everybody, when they talk about Du Bois, they talk about the talented 10th and how he felt like this elite strata of the Black community would lead the community into the future. And people kind of read that and they stop reading. Because if you fast forward to the 20s, he begins to interrogate this idea of the talented 10th. And by the time you get to the 40s, he's like, no, we need a guiding 100th, right? So he hadn't given up on this idea of leadership, but he began to embrace this idea of mass-based leadership. And so to me, I think Du Bois is right in the sense that leadership is really fundamental to how we think about forward progression. And if we think about a number of the problems that we face as a society and a number of the problems that we face in relation to education, I thought that at the heart of the program should be this question of leadership. Not necessarily leadership, like, for folks who are in college, colleges of education, usually the leadership programs deal with K through 12 leadership. Sometimes they may deal with higher ed leadership. But for me, the question was, how do we think about leadership very broadly, right? People who are engaged in some type of educational practice, but are engaged in the practice of leadership. And so for me, the question becomes, if we recognize the indispensability of leadership, the question becomes, what are the value orientations which inform how that leadership is enacted, hence equity? You know what I'm saying? And so because of the importance of us grounding ourselves in as rigorous a way of understanding the quandaries that we face as possible, then we have to deal with inquiry. And so for me, the idea of leadership, we have to do leadership, equity, and inquiry, all those things, the focus, the conceptual orientation, the methods, all bound up in the name. But to get at the process, it was really thinking about my own experience for the 12 years or so that I was at NOU. I worked, with students in the leadership program, as well as students in the curriculum advocacy and policy program, which when I first got there was curriculum and social inquiry. And there were a lot of things that I thought that we did exceedingly well, but there were other things that I thought, areas where I thought we could create space. Like, I'll give you an example. A lot of people don't know this. I had a Fulbright in Ghana. A lot of people know that. I had a Fulbright in Ghana in the mid-2010s, but when I got back, this is the part that people don't know, me and a few of my colleagues actually had this idea of creating a new doctoral program at NOU. It was going to be a program on global public policy inquiry or something. Forgetting what we called it, but it was something like global public policy inquiry. So myself and like three other folks, we began to meet. We laid out what the program could look like. There wasn't a lot of interest on the administrative level, but what I think we were attempting to get at is the need to create a space where we're asking these broader questions, right? Part of what I've attempted to do in my teaching, and it kind of is born out of this program, and both that failed effort, but also what I've created here, is how do we understand our own potential impact, and how do we actualize that potential, right, in practice? And so the program really emerged out of that type of orientation, those types of concerns, that type of understanding. And so therein, I wanted it to be a curriculum that reflected several domains. My area, which is the social foundations of education, which includes policy and history and sociology and the like, but also classes that deal very explicitly with leadership and leadership practice and so forth, as well as curriculum, as well as research methods and the like. And so really the curriculum, I think, synthesizes those things. And I guess the last thing I'll say, I wanted to, like, one of the things that I've learned from being at a college of education and interacting with colleagues who are in colleges of education, that a lot of times when you're in a college of education, we begin to look at education, our focus on education is often limited to the institutional context that are called schools. And that was actually something that has always frustrated me about, like, educational reform. And that was something I would raise with my students in foundations classes, how, it's interesting that when we look at all this educational policy, there's all this tinkering with the institution, but far less tinkering with the broader social mechanisms shape and determine the functioning of the institution. And so for me, I felt like part of what we need to have the capacity, and as best we can, to be able to interrogate this larger apparatus or what education constitutes outside of this thing called school. And so I also wanted the curriculum to be something that could engage with practitioners for a range of institutional contexts, not just folks who are in schools, but people who are engaged in an educational practice of a sort, right? Which would include, obviously, K through 12 folks, teachers or administrators, and folks that hire. It could also include folks who are in the nonprofit sector. It could also include folks who are in libraries, which I think are educational institutions, or museums, or any number of settings. And so I wanted us to think very broadly about impact, and so I think those are some of the things that inform the process, probably more of the ideas than the process itself.
And I know that we need, every time that I think about the fact that I still go into schools and they look exactly like they looked when I was in school, I know it's the same setup.
Right. Sometimes
that was 60-something years ago. It's the same setup.
Yeah.
And we are, our children, our teachers, everybody we're not the same.
No.
And so even I can't wait to see what comes out of your program.
Thank you.
Because I've seen doctoral programs as far left as, and I'm not going to say the school, but it was the school where I was, and it was at the point where they would hand you a dissertation topic. Like, you couldn't even choose something that you were passionate about. Like, no, here's your dissertation topic. Like, no. And they didn't want anything to be qualitative. It had to be all quantitative. And it didn't make sense to me. So I'm glad that I got the chance to research something that meant something to me. But anyway, so most doctoral programs truly ask you to step away from your personal or your professional identity and to just become a researcher. But it sounds like your program is asking students to do the opposite of that. We still want people to be researchers, but at the same time, what you all are doing is going to have an impact on our system. I would give it 3 years.
Oh, thank you.
I would give it 3 years, just because people are starting, people are getting to know the process.
Mm-hmm.
But it feels like your program is going to produce people who actually change and improve our systems.
Mm-hmm.
We got all of this checkmarky stuff that we do, but we're not really transforming anything. But I feel like yours is. So one of the things your program uses is a portfolio assessment instead of the traditional qualifying exam. It feels like that's a deliberate move.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Tell us about that choice. Like,
yeah. So it's interesting because, for folks that don't know, like in doctoral programs, people write a qualifying exam. Some people call it a comprehensive exam. Some people call it an area exam, but it's a test, usually a written test. Always a written test. Sometimes, the way it's delivered varies, but it's done, it's like kind of midway, but it's kind of like between coursework and dissertation, and the purpose of it is to assess your readiness to write a dissertation. So when we were designing the program, it's actually very interesting because in one of the first design iteration of the program, like in my mind, it's like point that was designed, that was 1.0, the design that was 1.5, the 2.0, and we ended up kind of with like a 2.5 that, anyway, there was one of those earlier designs where there actually was going to be a qualifying exam. And I had this conversation with Andrea Evans. She was at that time the interim dean of the College of Education. She was like, Kamau, I don't think in a program like this, a qualifying exam is really the best tool. I was like, that's interesting. And when people say this stuff to me, I take it and I evaluate it, and I may not always agree, but I say, well, what are the merits of this idea and what are the things that I can glean from this? And I reflected, I was like, well, yeah, it's a program by practice. What does the standard format of the qualifying exam, like when I took a qualifying exam in my PhD program, you had to answer 2 questions, we called it a general and a special field question. Right. And the general question was about sociology of education, and the special field question was about Black educational resistance. So that was fun to write. But the reality is that if you're a practitioner, if you're somebody that's in a school and you're concerned about literacy instruction, or you're somebody that's in a institutional higher education and you're concerned about retention, or if you're somebody in a nonprofit organization that deals with adult education and you're concerned about, retention or curriculum design or assessment or just the policy evaluation, or compliance, a test is not what you really need. You need something which facilitates critical reflection on your work and how one is growing in relation to that work and the broader quandaries that work is situated. And by that, I mean, I determined that we needed a measure. We needed something to accomplish 2 things. One that showed us that the program was enabling our students to grow as scholar practitioners. And 2, we needed a way for the students to see themselves. Because just like you, I've been in dissertation defenses, especially when I was at NOU, where there were students and it was clear, it was some point in that dissertation process. Sometimes it was the day of the defense, right, where they realized that they were not the same person that they were when they started their program, that they had become a scholar practitioner, and that they that they had acquired a type of expertise that they could then leverage in terms of their work, in terms of improving that work, but also in terms of providing insight and guidance to those around them. And this is a way, sort of an interim way, like rather than wait till we get to the dissertation stage for people to see themselves, this is a way of foregrounding that, where they can see themselves as they're entering into that process. And they understand how the way in which we're thinking about assessment, or how we're thinking about curriculum, or how we're thinking about leadership, or how we're thinking about history and sociology, how these things are impacting how they are engaging in their work, relating to community and parents, relating to their students, and this type of synergy that emerges within that. And we want to capture that, right? So for us, the portfolio system is a way of capturing that, this synergistic learning process that they're experiencing, both demonstrative of how they're growing as scholar practitioners, but also enabling them to see themselves, and so I think it'll be fruitful.
It feels so different, and it feels so impactful. Even when we were at the meeting, the symposium meeting we had a couple weeks ago, I started thinking about the terms that we use when we talk about the dissertation process. And it's like a defense, like I'm not fighting somebody, like I'm trying to shit her. But we have terms like that in education, and your program, just understanding or gaining more knowledge about how you all are going to be doing it is making me rethink the way that I'm working with doctoral students that I work with right now, because it's not a defense. It's not you trying to, well, I guess it is you trying to convince somebody or something, but it's also a passion of yours. I want to dig into the terms we use and like actually get those changed. So tell me some of the issues that you think that your scholars are going to be tackling within our system.
That's a good question. That's a really good question. And just, I want to just say something about what you said a moment ago, because I think it's very meaningful. Part of, I think, what the challenge is, which is why you have to be prepared to defend the dissertation, right? It's this question of where expertise resides, where knowledge resides, right? And as I've thought about this, my desire is for, by the time students get to that dissertation stage, we have created a context where they are clear, and the faculty are clear, and the community is clear, the expert, that they are someone who has honed their expertise as a scholar practitioner, right? So the expertise doesn't just reside in the domain of the faculty, the people who are overseeing this dissertation process, but there's a synergistic process. There's a community of learning which has emerged, and so we were trying to change those dynamics, and so for me, so we've been admitting students in preparation for the fall, and right now I think, in terms of like some of the questions that people are going to tackle, I'm already like looking at some of the things that people are looking at. Some people are looking at questions of policy, and policy around like higher education and finance, or some folks are looking at curriculum in very specific areas. Some looking at curriculum in STEM areas. Some looking at issues of how schools and community schools and families interrelate to one another. Other folks are looking at mentorship, as a way of leadership development. Mentorship is a way of facilitating people's growth in their practice, and so I'm seeing like people coming at a lot of there's some that are looking at issues of restorative justice, and some of the challenges facing restorative justice and how these practices can be implemented more robustly. And so I think that where this goes is that I think people will come out of this and they'll be engaged in work at the institutional level, which is vital and important. But I think that many of our students will also be engaged with work that at least attempts to move at two different levels, which is where which is again, kind of going back to the critique that I had earlier. I think that many of the students that come out of the program their work will be situated within the domain of community, recognizing that some of the changes that we desire to bring are changes which have to occur at the communal level. That is, that these are things which have to emerge out of our engagement, our dialogue, our work with, and our empowerment of our partnership with community. And so I think this idea of this, I think that some of the students will be very much facilitative of a recalibration of how our work as educational practitioners occurs in tandem with, or in partnership with community. But I think there are going to be other folks who are going to be looking at the issue of policy, and I think for them, it'll raise even bigger questions about how our systems work, how the types of processes and the types of outcomes which those processes produce, and how we can leverage community and institution and other folks to change those processes. And so I really see it as like the process where when you throw a rock into a pond and you get that initial impact. Yeah, that initial impact, that's the dissertation defense that, they did what they did. There's some kind of improvement in practice which has occurred. That's that initial ripple. But the ripples that radiate from there are all the other attendant changes. Because I think when we fully commit ourselves to transformation, we have to, this is one of the things that we want to deal with the students, we have to begin to think about what are the other processes, the structural processes that also are related to, interrelated with it. And so these questions of relation and interrelation to me are at the heart of the program, and they're at the heart of what we call the problem of practice, which is at the center of each of the LEI students' doctoral studies.
I love it. I love it. So what would you say to an educator who has their master's degree, has all of these ideas, has been thinking about it, been on the fence about pursuing a doctorate, but maybe feeling like, man, I let too much time go by, or I don't have, I don't have enough time to be able to do a program. But I know that when I heard about the supports you all were going to be providing, I wish that I had waited would be able to. I might go get a second doctorate. I'm not sure. But what would you say to an educator who might be on the fence, who really has been thinking about finding the right doctoral program?
Yeah, I really appreciate that. I think, so for me, I think this program is a program that is very much oriented around engaging with the context in which people find themselves, right? Meaning that their own work really becomes the topic of inquiry, the focus of that inquiry, right? And so whereas, there'll be courses and there'll be papers that one has to write, but inevitably, their own professional practice is the thing which is at the heart of which drives their inquiry. It's this thing where it's a process whereby they'll be engaging in the development of their capacity as practitioners as well as as scholar practitioners, but doing so through the vehicle of the core issues and challenges and contexts that they navigate every day. And so to me, as a process, it's focused on a fuller realization of their practice. You know what I'm saying? Because it's not based on this idea of divorcing themselves from that context in which they live and they work. And so the program, it's I think for folks that are on the fence, it's a program that has really been designed around this idea of enabling, them to address the key issues and challenges that they see every day around them. Not some issue from Mars and not some problem from Venus, but something that we grapple with every day. And so we try to also be intentional about other things, like even like course delivery. So it's a hybrid program. Course meet once a month on a Saturday, because we want to make sure we want to maximize accessibility, so that and we want to build community, because we recognize that one of the things that are most vital in our learning experiences is community. Community is one of those vital vehicles. And so we see it as a process whereby they learn through reflection of their practice, they learn through engagement with the faculty, they learn through engagement with their colleagues, they learn by approaching and interrogating and attempting to improve their work and reflecting on the implications of that. So we see this idea of the type of learning that emerged out of it as being multidimensional. And so I think that it'll be a very accessible and also very rewarding experience, really, for anybody, no matter where they are in terms of the arc of their careers, right? Because even if you've been out of school for 20 years or so, the key focus is your work itself. right? And that I think becomes a sort of segue, if you will, or means of enabling one to navigate that process with intentionality and efficacy.
I love it. And I love the way you are listening to the people who you're building the program for. Cause then it's different. It feels like, yeah, I really do belong here. They've listened to what I say I need. And that's so different. That's not, that doesn't happen. Usually there's a program, you jump on this boat right here and I hope you can make it. And then you don't want to like stop swimming because you just don't want to quit. But yours feels like, I really want to be here. I really want to solve this. And so it just has a different feel for me.
Yeah, and I'll say it's interesting too, because I was talking to some faculty about a year ago, and they were asking me a question, and they were saying, well, what if this is a problem, and what if that's a problem in terms of like some curriculum stuff. And I was like, well, the program has been designed around this idea of ongoing improvement, and so like that was another design feature. Is this idea that just as we're supposed to grow as practitioners, the vehicles of that growth should also grow. And so to your point, like this idea of listening and engaging in constant evaluation of what we're doing as a program and growing and making adaptations in relation to that, that's also a key concern, because we want it to be a program that really gives people what they need, right? Not what we think that they need, right? But what people articulate a need for in relation to their day-to-day work, their day-to-day life.
I love it. So if somebody wanted to learn more or apply, can you give us quickly, and I will ask our editor to put it in the notes as well. But like, how would they, what website do they look for?
Yep. So they can go to neiu.edu/LEIEDD. So neiu.edu/LEIEDD. And there's a little information about the program. We do these information sessions periodically. We had a really wonderful event that you mentioned. Was that 3 weeks ago now? What does it mean to be bridging theory and practice? What does it mean to be a scholar practitioner? Very, very, very powerful event. And so, like I said, you'll go to this website. You can get more information about the program, and as well as even apply. If you're interested. But you can also reach out to me as well. I'm at ka-Rashid, Rashid @neiu.edu. Again, ka-Rashid @neiu.edu. And I'm always happy to engage with folks who have questions about the program as well. And to your, and Gloria, you were right. I just met with someone on Zoom 2 weeks ago, and there was a situation. They were in this doc program, and they said, hey, look, this is your research. And it's like, oh, really?
It's something that we weren't even like interested in. And I think the students at that time like pushed back so much. They were like, okay, pick something. Like, what?
Right. Yeah,
Right. But Dr. Rashid, you are now officially an urban legend. I got to get your t-shirt to you. I want to thank you like a million times. I'm so glad that I came out of my shell and actually participated more with the Racial Justice Task Force so that I could learn more from you. And I'm so excited about being on the advisory committee. And I know that this program is getting ready to change how we do doctoral programs. I hope not just in Chicago, but just around the world, because it sounds amazing. And I cannot wait to see the results. Thank you so much for being the guest.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.